the earth moved before Francis Davenport heard the warning bell. One moment the carriage was descending the chalk road toward Kestrel Court, beneath a pale Surrey evening, and the next the left wheel lurched into a hollow with such force that Lady Judith's travelling case struck the opposite seat. Flora cried out. The coachman swore under his breath. Francis had already turned toward the quarry. A jagged line had opened beside the road, narrow as a ribbon, near the hedge, and widening toward Greycross Down, where 3 cottages stood below the white face of the workings. Loose chalk whispered into the fissure. Then came a deeper sound. Wood groaned beneath the hill. "Stay inside," Lady Judith commanded. Francis opened the carriage door. "There are people below." "There are always people below," Flora said, gathering her skirts away from the dust. Frances stepped down before the footman could stop her. The ground shifted beneath one shoe, but she caught the carriage rail and looked toward the quarry path. A woman stood near the edge with a small girl beside her, both staring at the crack as if fear had emptied them of movement. Beyond them, a cart had tipped against a bank, its horse strained in the traces. Frances lifted her skirts and crossed the road. "Mrs. Hales," she called, recognizing the quarryman's wife. "Take the child toward the thorn hedge. Keep to the grass." The woman blinked. "My husband's below." "Then ring the bell while I move you away from the road." A sharper report sounded from the hillside. Something burst from a dark opening above the lower track and struck the chalk. Frances saw red paint before she understood that the object was wood. A support wedge rolled once and vanished beneath a spill of white dust. She reached it as another tremor passed under her feet. A flint sliced through the left sole of her evening shoe. Pain burned across her heel, but she bent, seized the wedge, and pushed it into her reticule. "The bell," she told Mrs. Hales. "Now." Together they reached the post beside the weighing shed. Frances pulled the rope. The iron bell gave one violent note, then another. Men shouted below. A foreman's whistle answered from the quarry floor. Frances rang until she saw figures moving away from the lower cutting. Only then did she look down. Her black kid-leather shoes were powdered white. The left sole had split at the edge. Red paint marked the leather where she had trapped the wedge beneath her foot before lifting it. Blood had begun to warm the stocking at her heel. "Miss Davenport!" Lady Judith's voice carried farther than the bell. "Have you lost all sense of yourself?" Frances turned. Lady Judith stood beside the carriage, rigid with fury. Flora remained inside, watching, as though Frances had chosen humiliation for entertainment. "The ground opened," Frances said, "and the warning bell had not been rung. You are dressed for dinner at a duke's house." The hill did not appear to know that. Flora laughed once. Lady Judith did not. By the time the carriage reached Kestrel Court, the light had softened over the western lawns, but nothing about Frances had improved. Chalk clung to the hem of her gown. Her heel throbbed. The footman at the entrance glanced at her shoes and immediately looked away with the discipline of a well-trained servant. Frances was grateful for that small mercy. In the cloakroom, she cleaned what she could with a damp cloth and tightened the blue silk stitching inside the left shoe where an older repair had begun to pull loose. She could not mend the sole. She could only make it hold long enough to cross the drawing room. Lady Judith entered while Frances was lowering her skirt. "You will say the carriage was delayed." "It was delayed. You will not mention the quarry." Frances looked up. People might have been buried. No one was buried, because the bell was rung. Lady Judith's mouth thinned. "Do not mistake disorder for heroism," She left before Francis could answer. Dinner had already begun forming when they entered the drawing-room. Candlelight shone against gilt frames and polished silver. The Duke of Norchester's stood near the mantel, listening to an elderly baronet, with the patient attention of a man who had learned how power could appear courteous. Arthur Wycliffe was taller than Francis had expected, broad-shouldered without severity, his dark evening coat cut with exact restraint. His expression changed only slightly when Lady Judith apologized for their lateness. His eyes moved to Flora, then to Francis, not to her face, to the chalk caught along the edge of her gown, to the careful way she avoided placing weight on her left foot, then back to her face again. He had noticed. Francis knew it with the same certainty with which she had known the hill was moving. At table, Lady Judith placed Flora within easy conversation of the Duke. Francis sat farther down, between a clergyman and Arthur's widowed aunt. She slipped both feet beneath her chair and drew her skirts forward until the torn shoes disappeared in shadow. Soup was served. Conversation turned to county roads, then tenant drainage, then a musicale planned for the following week. Frances kept her voice low and her feet still. Flora did not. "My cousin has had a very adventurous evening," she said brightly. You would hardly believe what she considered suitable conduct before dining at Kestrel Court. Lady Judith lifted her wineglass. "Flora, I only mean that Frances arrived, looking as though she had walked through a chalk pit." Several guests smiled. Frances felt the split sole loosen another fraction beneath her foot. Across the table, Arthur set down his spoon. His gaze lowered once, not beneath the cloth, but toward the pale dust caught in the stitching near her hem. Then he shifted his chair. The movement seemed casual. It was not. His boot and the carved leg of the chair blocked the clearest line of sight from Flora's side of the table. A footman placed the next dish. Arthur looked directly at Frances. "Was the Greycross warning bell rung this evening, Miss Davenport?" The room quieted. Flora's smile faltered. Frances answered carefully. "Yes, Your Grace." "For what reason?" The road settled beside the lower workings. A fissure opened near the cottages. Were the quarry families clear of it? "They were moving away when we left." "Who gave the order?" Lady Judith asked. "There was no order," Francis said. "Not at first." Arthur's attention sharpened the bell. Francis held his gaze. "I did." The clergyman beside her inhaled softly. Flora stared as though Francis had confessed to climbing the church steeple. Arthur did not smile. "You judged the ground unsafe?" "I heard timber strain beneath the chalk. Something had already come free from the support opening." "Did you see what?" Frances felt the hard shape inside her reticule against her knee. "Yes." Arthur turned to the steward standing near the wall. "Mr. Hale, send word to Greycross. There will be no blasting tomorrow morning. The lower working is to remain closed until it is inspected." Lady Judith stiffened. "Your Grace, surely one tremor does not require such alarm." "No," Arthur said. "A warning bell requires attention." He resumed the meal and the room followed him. The conversation moved on. Frances did not. For the first time that evening, the pain in her heel felt smaller than the silence. Someone had chosen to keep for her. After dinner, she waited near the drawing-room door while Lady Judith and Flora joined the other ladies. Arthur approached with the Dowager Duchess only a few paces away. "Your shoe is failing," he said quietly. Heat rose into Frances's face. "I had hoped it was not visible." "It was visible before you sat down." She looked toward the floor. "Please do not mention it. I have no intention of making your difficulty a performance." His voice held no pity. That made it harder to steady her breath. You shifted your chair. I did. Thank you. You need not thank me for refusing to embarrass you. He glanced at her reticule. You said something came free from the support opening. Frances hesitated, then opened the clasp. The red-painted wedge lay against her folded handkerchief, one crushed end damp with chalk. Arthur did not reach for it. May I? He asked. She placed it in his palm. He turned it once beneath the candlelight, studying the pale grain where the paint had flaked away. His expression lost its ease. Miss Davenport, he said, who painted beech to resemble oak? By morning, the red paint had dried into a thin, dishonest skin. Frances saw it the moment the county surveyor turned the wedge beneath the north window of Kestrel Court's map room. Daylight exposed what candlelight had only suggested. The wood beneath the flaking color was pale, close-grained, and already darkened at one crushed end by damp. It was not the deep, open grain of seasoned oak. Beech, the surveyor said at last. He was a spare, grey-haired man with careful hands and the habit of speaking only after he had finished looking. Not good beech either. Too green when it was cut, I should think. Arthur stood on the opposite side of the table, one palm resting beside an unrolled estate map. The ease Frances had seen at dinner was absent. He wore a dark morning coat, and there was nothing careless in the way he watched the wedge pass between the surveyor's fingers. The Dowager Duchess sat near the fire, with her embroidery untouched in her lap. Her presence made the meeting proper, though Frances suspected very little escaped her while she appeared occupied by silk thread. Frances remained near the end of the table. Her left heel had been washed and bound with clean linen before breakfast. The wound was shallow, but the pressure of standing still made it throb. She had worn an older pair of plain walking shoes for the carriage journey. The torn evening shoes rested in brown paper beside her reticule, exactly where she had placed them after returning to Lady Judith's dower house. Lady Judith had objected to Frances carrying them back to Kestrel Court. She had objected more strongly when Frances refused to leave the wedge behind. Recent notices from Greycross state that the lower supports were replaced with seasoned oak, Arthur said. 3 weeks ago, the surveyor replied. If this came from those supports, the notice is false. If, Frances repeated. Both men looked at her. She did not apologize. The wedge was expelled near the fissure, but I did not see the support from which it came. The paint may match. The wood may contradict the notices. That does not yet prove the whole structure was built of beech. The surveyor's expression warmed by a degree. Quite right, Miss Davenport. Arthur studied her for a moment. You prefer a smaller truth to a convenient one. A smaller truth is still true, and a convenient one usually belongs to the person with the most to lose. The Dowager Duchess lowered her embroidery. Arthur's mouth almost curved, but he did not make a jest of it. How did you know the wood was wrong? He asked. Frances touched the edge of the table rather than the bandage beneath her stocking. My father collected fossils from the Surrey chalk. He was not a learned gentleman in the formal sense, but he observed everything: timber, stone, water, the way soil settled after rain. He taught me that oak has patience in it. Beech has a closer grain and suffers differently when damp reaches it. Your father took you into quarries, to the safe edges, never below without permission. And yesterday, I did not enter the working. She met his eyes. I crossed the road, rang the bell, and recovered the wedge where it had fallen. Nothing more. The surveyor nodded. That should be recorded precisely. Frances drew the parcel containing her shoes toward him. Then I should like these recorded as well. Arthur's gaze dropped to the brown paper. Your shoes. The red paint is on the left sole. Chalk is lodged in the stitching. They may help establish where I stood and what I crossed. They do not prove I saw the inside of the working, because I did not. You are willing to surrender them? The surveyor asked. To your custody, yes, not to the Duke's. Silence settled over the map room. Frances felt the boldness of the words only after they had left her. Arthur looked at her, then at the surveyor. That is entirely proper. There was no offense in his voice. If anything, there was approval. Nothing connected to the inquiry should depend upon my private possession. The surveyor unfolded the paper. The shoes looked smaller on the broad oak table than they had beneath the dinner cloth. The left sole gaped at the edge. Chalk whitened the seams. A red streak crossed the worn leather. And inside the lining, the blue silk repair remained visible where Frances had tightened it the night before. The Dowager Duchess's eyes rested on the shoes, but she offered no pity. Frances was grateful for that too. The blood is inside the heel, Frances said. It came after the sole split. It should not be mistaken for evidence of anything else. You have thought this through, Arthur said. I have thought through what others may claim. The surveyor prepared 3 sheets of heavy paper. He wrote the date, Wednesday, the 16th of May, 1849. He described the wedge, the shoes, and Frances's account of where each had been found. Frances read every line before signing. The wedge was wrapped first, then tied with string, and sealed in red wax bearing the surveyor's plain office mark. The shoes were wrapped separately and sealed in the same manner. A 3rd packet held Frances's written description. They will remain in my locked evidence cupboard, he said. No one opens them without witnesses. And I receive a receipt? Frances asked. You do. Arthur's eyes flickered toward her again. You have been doubted before. It was not a question. Most women have, not always with evidence in their hands. Especially, then, the surveyor sanded the ink, shook the excess away, and handed Frances a signed receipt. She folded it once and placed it in her reticule. Only after that did Arthur turn to his steward. The Greycross closure is extended for 48 hours. No blasting, no removal of supports, and no carting of spoil until the surveyor has inspected the surface. The steward bowed. Yes, Your Grace, and send a copy of the order to Mr. Vicary. There is no need, a voice said from the doorway. Cyril Vicary entered with a leather document case beneath one arm. He was neatly dressed, neither hurried nor apologetic. His hair was touched with grey at the temples. His expression suggested that he had arrived not to answer questions, but to correct a misunderstanding among people who had allowed emotion to outrun sense. Lady Judith came behind him. Flora did not. Your Grace, Cyril said with a bow. Your Grace, he added to the Dowager Duchess. Then he inclined his head toward Frances. Miss Davenport. Arthur did not invite him farther into the room. You have received no copy of my order. Lady Judith was kind enough to inform me. Cyril set the case on a side table and removed a folded certificate. I had expected concern after yesterday's disturbance. Fortunately, the Greycross workings were inspected 6 weeks ago. He placed the document before Arthur. The lower adit was declared closed. The remaining supports were sound. There is no active heading near the road. Arthur read the first page without touching the second. Signed by you, as estate agent and solicitor overseeing the lease. Are you qualified to inspect quarry supports? I relied upon the foreman's report. Frances felt the room tighten. Arthur glanced toward the surveyor, but Cyril continued before either man could speak. As for the painted wedge, there are several explanations. It may have come from old material stored near the opening. It may have been discarded months ago, or Miss Davenport may have crossed farther into the private working than she recalls. Arthur's voice cooled. You are suggesting she dislodged it. I am suggesting we should not mistake possession for innocence. Lady Judith remained near the door, composed and watchful. Frances saw the trap clearly. If Arthur defended her too quickly, Cyril would call it favoritism. If she became angry, Lady Judith would call it instability. Arthur spoke first. You have offered no proof that Miss Davenport entered the working. Nor has she proved that she did not. That is not how an accusation acquires weight. Frances looked at Arthur. His instinct was honorable. It was also too fast. Your Grace, she said. He stopped. She turned to Cyril. Let him finish. Lady Judith's brows rose. Cyril smiled without warmth. Thank you, Miss Davenport. The official plan is quite clear. The dangerous section described last evening does not exist. The adit ends well before the road. If the plan is accurate, no active support could have expelled a wedge where she claims to have found it. And if the plan is not accurate, Frances asked, then you would need evidence beyond a damaged shoe and a painted scrap of wood. The surveyor drew the quarry plan toward the center of the table. Arthur held one corner flat. Frances moved beside him, careful of her heel. The drawn adit ran beneath Greycross Down, narrowed, and stopped at a neat black line. The surveyor placed his finger upon the marked end, then measured the distance to the location Frances had described in her signed statement. His hand became still. 40 yards, he said. Arthur looked from the map to Cyril. Frances looked at the empty space beyond the inked line. The official plan ended 40 yards before the place where the hill had broken open. The official plan ended in ink. The hill did not. On Thursday morning, Frances stood above Greycross Down, with the county surveyor's certified copy folded beneath his arm, and the wind pressing the edge of her bonnet ribbon against her cheek. The lower workings were silent under the Duke's order. No hammers sounded from the chalk face. No carts moved along the cut road. Even the warning bell seemed to hold the memory of its own violence. Arthur had insisted that the first inspection remain above ground. The surveyor agreed. The aided entrance lay below them, behind a timber barrier, dark and narrow, with fresh chalk scattered where the fissure had opened 2 days earlier. Frances kept to the firm grass. Her left heel remained tender beneath the clean linen dressing, though the older walking shoes she wore gave better support than the ruined evening pair now sealed in the surveyor's locked cupboard. The red-painted wedge rested there as well. Neither object had returned to her possession. The Dowager Duchess waited in a carriage near the upper track, close enough to satisfy propriety, and far enough to avoid the dust. Arthur walked beside Frances without offering his arm until the ground dipped sharply. "Will you take it?" he asked. "For the descent," she said. His sleeve was firm beneath her gloved hand. He did not pull her closer or adjust her pace. When the path leveled, she released him, and he let his arm fall without comment. The surveyor stopped near the edge of the fresh spoil heap. "The plan places the end of the adit there," he said, pointing with his measuring rod toward a low rise beneath the eastern bank, 40 yards short of the fissure. Arthur looked toward the road where Frances had rung the bell, and yet the wedge appeared beside the fissure. That is what Miss Davenport has stated, and what the paint on her shoe may help establish. Frances added. "May," the surveyor repeated approvingly, "not must." Frances moved closer to the spoil without stepping onto it. Most of the chalk was white and clean, broken into rough lumps no larger than a clenched hand. Near the top lay a darker band. Grey marl clung to several pieces, and something tightly curled showed in one fractured surface. She bent, keeping one hand against the slope for balance. "Mr. Bell," she said to the surveyor, "would you look at this?" He joined her. Arthur remained a pace behind, giving the surveyor room. Frances pointed to the curl embedded in the chalk, an ammonite. Mr. Bell crouched. "A small one. There are 3 more in that band." She traced the line without touching it. "My father found the same grey marl north of the lease stones, beneath the upper Kestrel slope," he said. "The seam did not run this far south at the surface." Arthur's gaze moved toward the crest of his own land. Could this spoil have been brought from elsewhere? "It could," Frances said, "or it could have come from a deeper section of the working. One piece proves very little." Mr. Bell straightened. "Miss Davenport is correct. Similar stone may occur in more than one place. We would need measurement, a sound point of reference, and preferably more than one sample." Arthur looked at her. "You do not seem disappointed. Why should I be? You may have found what supports your suspicion." "Suspicion is not proof, Your Grace. You would rather be measured than praised. Praise is pleasant. Measurement is useful." A faint smile touched his mouth, then vanished as he turned back to the hill. "I begin to understand why Mr. Vickery finds you inconvenient." Frances did not answer. She had learned that amusement could become a form of intimacy too quickly if one was lonely enough to welcome it. Arthur seemed to read the caution in her silence. He addressed the surveyor instead. "Collect one piece from the grey band. Label the exact place. I want witnesses to the wrapping." Mr. Bell nodded. "The estate steward and one of the magistrate's clerks should suffice. Send for them." Arthur's tone carried easy authority, but Frances noticed the tension beneath it. Something about the plan had troubled him since the previous morning. He had studied it longer than anyone else, especially the Duke's endorsement, written at the bottom of the repair summary. She waited until Mr. Bell had moved toward the upper track before speaking. "You recognized the report?" Arthur looked toward the silent addit. "I recognized my own hand." "You endorsed it. Last winter." There was no attempt to soften the admission. "Vickery sent a summary through my estate office. It stated that the lower adit had been closed, damaged supports replaced, and the roadside section made safe." "Did you inspect the works?" "No. The word came cleanly. I had been in Yorkshire for 3 weeks. There were flood accounts waiting, 2 boundary disputes, and a tenant appeal concerning common rights." I read the summary. I saw that the foreman's name had been included. I signed the endorsement. Frances felt the weight of his confession. Not because it absolved him, but because he had offered it before she could force it from him. Your name would have made the certificate difficult to question. "That is precisely what troubles me." He faced her. The morning light sharpened the planes of his expression. "I have spent years believing that rank is most useful when it ends uncertainty. I did not consider that it can also preserve a convenient lie. Most lies survive because someone respectable repeats them. Do you believe I helped one survive? I believe you may have. A lesser man might have recoiled." Arthur only nodded once. "Then embarrassment is the smallest price I may be asked to pay. It may be more than embarrassment. If families were placed beneath unsafe ground, it ought to be." The answer unsettled Frances more than denial would have done. She had known men who defended themselves before facts. She had known men who apologized only after the room had turned against them. Arthur had placed his own name inside the inquiry, while he still possessed every opportunity to keep it outside. A sharp report broke across the downs. Francis froze. Birds rose from the thorn trees in a dark rush. A second sound followed, lower and more distant. Chalk shifted somewhere beyond the eastern ridge. Arthur turned toward Greycross. That was blasting. The closure remains in force, Francis said. It does. He was already moving. He called to the steward near the carriage. Send 2 riders to the lower entrance, another to the north track. No one leaves with tools, spoil, or timber until Mr. Bell has spoken to them. The steward ran. Arthur looked back at Francis. Stay with my mother. It was the first command he had given her. She lifted her chin. I will stay above ground. I will not promise ignorance. Something flashed in his eyes, not anger. Recognition, fairly said. He descended with Mr. Bell and the estate steward while Francis returned to the carriage. The Dowager Duchess opened the door before a footman could reach it. Was that what I think it was? Blasting after the closure. Francis took the offered seat. Arthur has sent riders. They waited nearly an hour. When Arthur returned, white dust marked the hem of his coat. His expression answered before he spoke. The lower entrance was empty. The tools were gone. The men who were meant to be there claim no night crew was employed. And the blast? Francis asked. A fresh cavity near the eastern rise, too far from the marked end of the adit. Mr. Bell climbed into the opposite carriage with the wrapped chalk sample on his knees, witnessed and sealed. Someone is still working beneath that hill, he said. Someone who does not wish to be measured. Before dawn the next morning, a farm boy carrying milk to Kestrel Court saw a cart leaving Greycross by the north track. It was piled with support timbers. Even in the thin grey light, the fresh red paint shone along their cut ends. The farm boy's account reached Kestrel Court before breakfast, and by 10 o'clock the north track had been searched from the quarry gate to the lower beech wood. The cart was gone. So were the freshly painted timbers. Only 2 narrow wheel ruts remained in the damp earth, running toward Lady Judith's property before fading where the road hardened. Arthur stood beside the tracks with Mr. Bell, the county surveyor, while Francis watched from firmer ground a few yards away. Her heel was still tender, but the wound had closed enough that she no longer favored the foot with every step. The shoes she wore were plain and serviceable. The ruined evening pair remained sealed in Mr. Bell's locked evidence cupboard, along with the red-painted wedge. Nothing important had been returned to her. Nothing had been privately removed. The cart passed here after 4, the farm boy said. He twisted his cap between both hands. I know because the dairy clock had struck, and the sky was just turning. Did you see the driver? Arthur asked. No, Your Grace. He had his collar up. There was another man walking beside the horse. Were the timbers old or newly cut? Mr. Bell asked. Some looked old. Some had fresh ends. All of them had red paint. Arthur gave the boy a coin for his trouble, then sent him home with instructions to repeat the account only if called before a magistrate or surveyor. Francis noticed the care in that. Arthur was learning that public protection could become another form of pressure if it made a witness feel owned. Mr. Bell crouched near one wheel rut and touched the edge with his measuring rod. They were carrying weight. Enough to remove what we might have inspected, Francis said. Or enough to make us believe that, Arthur replied. She looked at him. You think the cart may have been staged? I think Mr. Vickery prefers certainty when it serves him and doubt when it does not. Then we must not imitate him. Arthur's mouth shifted, almost a smile. No convenient conclusions, not even inconvenient ones. Mr. Bell rose. There is still the spoil heap. We can collect from the grey band under witnesses today. They returned to Greycross Down, under a pale sky. The lower workings remained silent, though the silence no longer felt like obedience. It felt arranged. The estate steward and a clerk from the nearest magistrate's office joined them at the upper track. Lady Judith arrived in her own carriage soon afterward, accompanied by Flora and Cyril Vickery. Her presence was not required. That was precisely why she had come. "I understand His Grace is now examining stones," she said, as the footman helped her down. One would think the county had no more urgent concerns. "A hill moving beneath occupied cottages is sufficiently urgent," Arthur answered. Lady Judith glanced toward Frances. "If it moved." Frances kept her voice even. "The fissure remains visible, so do cracks after a dry spring. They are not always omens." "No," Frances said, "that is why Mr. Bell is collecting evidence instead of accepting my fear as proof." Cyril's eyes narrowed slightly. He had expected emotion. Frances gave him method. Mr. Bell approached the spoil heap with the clerk and steward beside him. He selected a block from the grey marl band where Frances had seen the curled fossil. It was larger than the sample she had first noticed, heavy enough that he used both hands. When he set it on a flat stone for examination, a fragment broke from one edge. Frances caught it instinctively before it rolled into the chalk. The sharp surface sliced the base of her palm through the thin glove. She drew in a breath and placed the fragment down at once. "You are hurt," Arthur said. "Only a shallow cut." "May I see?" He did not reach for her. The question mattered more than the concern. Frances removed the glove carefully and turned her hand upward. A narrow line of blood marked the skin below her thumb. Arthur took out a clean handkerchief, but held it between them rather than pressing it against her palm. "Will you permit me?" "Yes." His touch was deliberate and light. He folded the linen over the cut, his fingers resting against hers only long enough to stop the blood. Frances felt the warmth of his hand through the cloth. It was not the contact itself that unsettled her. It was the restraint. He could have acted without asking. Most men of his rank would have called the omission insignificant. Arthur waited until she closed her fingers around the handkerchief before releasing her. "Thank you," she said. "That one you may thank me for," he replied softly. "I had your permission." The words stayed with her while Mr. Bell labelled the fossil-bearing block. The clerk wrote the location, date, and names of those present. The sample was wrapped in heavy paper, tied with string, and sealed in wax. Arthur did not take possession. Frances did not touch it again. It passed directly into Mr. Bell's custody. Cyril watched every movement with the expression of a man who had begun calculating how much truth might cost. "A fossil proves nothing about a tunnel," he said. "Correct," Frances replied. "It may indicate the source of the spoil. It does not establish it alone." Flora gave a soft laugh. "You do enjoy making everything sound grave." Frances turned to her cousin. "The ground does not become safer because I describe it pleasantly." Lady Judith stepped closer to the sealed parcel. This fascination with chalk was encouraged by her father. He filled rooms with specimens and neglected ordinary responsibilities. Frances felt the familiar pressure behind her ribs. She had heard the judgment before, always offered as if repetition could turn cruelty into family history. Arthur's gaze shifted to her, but he did not intervene. This time he let her answer. "My father observed what others preferred not to see." Your father embarrassed himself, Lady Judith said. He once predicted a landslip that never occurred. It occurred 6 weeks later, after the tenants had been moved. Lady Judith's face tightened. Because Sir Giles ordered the move as a courtesy, not because your father was correct. Francis looked across the white slope. He was mocked until he stopped speaking publicly about the ground. When the bank later fell, everyone praised Sir Giles for caution. The wind lifted the edge of her bonnet. She held it down with her uninjured hand. My father died, believing careful knowledge had no place in rooms governed by rank. Arthur's voice was quiet. Is that why you rang the bell before protecting your gown? Francis met his eyes. And before protecting my shoes. You could have been injured. So could the woman and child below the road. That was not my question. No, she said. It was why I acted. I could not bear to become another person who noticed and remained silent. Something changed in his expression. Admiration had been there before, but this was more private and more dangerous. He saw not only what she had done, but the inheritance of silence she had refused. Lady Judith turned away first. Mr. Bell carried the sealed sample to his case. The timber inquiry continued that afternoon in Kestrel Court's estate office. A merchant from Guildford arrived with his order book and stated plainly that he had supplied no seasoned oak to Greycross during the repair period. Not one length, he said. Beech boards, yes, 2 loads, but no oak supports. Cyril leaned back in his chair. Lady Judith's woods supplied what was required. The Davenport woodman, summoned from the Dower estate, stood near the door with his cap in hand. We felled beech, he said. No oak, sir. The oaks marked for cutting were left standing by her ladyship's order. For what use was the beech taken? Mr. Bell asked. The man glanced at Lady Judith. Quarry use. Supports? Francis asked. That was what I was told. Lady Judith dismissed the distinction with a movement of her glove. Beech, oak. Timber is timber when properly cut, not in damp chalk, Francis said. Beech holds moisture differently. It decays sooner. Paint can conceal the grain, but not alter it. Mr. Bell confirmed the danger in practical terms. Cyril began speaking of invoices, substitutions, and local discretion. Arthur stopped him. The question is simple. Money was charged for oak. No oak was purchased. Beech was delivered and painted. Lady Judith's composure thinned. You are speaking as though theft has been proved. No, Francis said. Only substitution. Lady Judith looked at her with open dislike. You take great satisfaction in these distinctions. They are what keep accusation from becoming fact. By evening, the quarry closure had begun to expose more than unsafe timber. 2 scheduled lease payments had not appeared in the Davenport Dower accounts, and a clerk reported discrepancies between the profit declared by Cyril and the quantity of chalk removed. Lady Judith read the figures twice. Then she closed the ledger and looked toward Flora. This will not be settled by allowing Francis to perform expertise before men eager to admire her. Cyril gathered his papers. Then we change the question. To what? Not whether the quarry is unsafe. He fastened the leather case. Whether Miss Davenport created the appearance of danger. Lady Judith considered him in silence. Arrange a county supper, she said at last. Invite the magistrates, the lease trustees, and everyone who heard the Duke praise her. Flora's smile returned slowly. And the shoes? Cyril's expression hardened. Especially the shoes. Lady Judith waited until the breakfast servants had withdrawn before she placed Francis' folded statement beside the silver coffee pot. The paper had been copied from the account. Francis had signed for Mr. Bell. though no one had asked her permission to duplicate it. Sunlight touched the edge of the page. Lady Judith's hand covered the rest. "You will withdraw this." Frances looked from the statement to her aunt's face. Flora sat at the opposite end of the table in a pale morning gown, breaking toast into small pieces without eating them. "I will not," Frances said. Lady Judith's fingers tightened on the paper. "You are living beneath my roof. Temporarily. You are received in this county because the Davenport name still protects you." The Davenport name did not ring the warning bell. Flora sighed. Must every conversation return to that dreadful quarry? Frances turned to her. "The men who work there cannot turn away from it. You speak as if you were one of them." "No, I speak because they have less freedom to do so." Lady Judith pushed the statement across the table. "Your place in this household depends upon your ceasing to embarrass the family." The words did not surprise Frances. Their clarity did. For years, Lady Judith had wrapped control in the language of gratitude, propriety, and kinship. This morning she offered no ribbon. Frances rested her hand beside the paper. The shallow cut in her palm had closed. Her heel was almost healed. Neither small wound hurt as much as the knowledge that she had once mistaken endurance for safety. "A place that requires silence is not protection," she said. Flora stared. Lady Judith's expression became still. "You would leave?" "Yes. To go where?" "Mrs. Vale has rooms in the market town." Mrs. Vale was Frances's widowed cousin, on her mother's side elderly, respectable, and sufficiently removed from county ambitions to be considered uninteresting. Frances had written to her the previous evening. The answer had arrived before breakfast. "You arranged this without consulting me. I arranged my own lodging." "With what money?" "My annuity." Lady Judith gave a short, incredulous laugh. "That sum will not maintain the habits of a gentlewoman." "Then I will alter my habits, and when the county decides you have invented this entire affair, I will still have left a house where truth was charged as rent." Flora pushed back her chair. "You always make deprivation sound noble." Frances looked at the untouched toast on Flora's plate, the fresh ribbons at her sleeves, and the easy security of a daughter who had never been told that shelter could be withdrawn if she spoke at the wrong moment. "No," she said, "I only refuse to make obedience sound generous." Lady Judith rose. "You may go this afternoon. You will not take anything purchased for this household." Frances had expected the condition. "I will take only what belongs to me, and you will not use my carriage. I have hired one." That silenced Flora. Lady Judith's face hardened with something colder than anger. Frances had not merely refused. She had prepared. By noon, 2 modest trunks stood in the entrance hall. Frances packed no drawing-room ornaments, no books from the Davenport shelves, and no clothing that could be disputed. Her ruined evening shoes were not among her possessions. They remained sealed in Mr. Bell's locked evidence cupboard, exactly where she had chosen to place them. The red-painted wedge and fossil-bearing chalk sample remained under the same independent custody. Frances carried only the signed receipt in her reticule. As the hired carriage drew near, Mrs. Hales appeared at the side gate. The quarryman's wife wore a brown shawl despite the mild day. She kept glancing toward the house. Frances crossed the gravel to meet her beyond the hearing of the footman. "Is your daughter well?" she asked. "She wakes when carts pass," Mrs. Hales said, "but she's well enough." Her hands worried the fringe of the shawl. "My husband spoke to Mr. Bell only a little, about blasting after dark." Frances did not ask what he had said. "Does Lady Judith know?" "Mr. Vickery knows someone talked. He's asking which men were near the lower road. Mrs. Hales looked toward the servants' entrance. Our cottage goes with my husband's work. If they turn him out, we've nowhere near the quarry to go. Do you want me to tell the Duke? Not his name, please. Francis heard the fear beneath the request. Arthur could stop an eviction with one order. He could also mark the Hales family as the center of a dispute they had not chosen. I will not name him without his consent, she said. Not to his grace, not to Mr. Bell, not to anyone. Relief weakened Mrs. Hales's face for only a moment. Then how can we help? You have already helped by telling me the danger is not over. Francis took her hand. If your husband decides to speak, I will make certain he is not left alone before men who control his wages and roof. Mrs. Hales nodded, then stepped away as the hired carriage came through the gate. Francis did not look back at Lady Judith's windows when she left. 2 days later, she attended an afternoon gathering at Kestrel Court under the Dowager Duchess's invitation. Mrs. Vale accompanied her, dressed in serviceable black silk and carrying the calm of a woman no longer impressed by titles. The company was smaller than a formal dinner, but large enough for curiosity to travel easily. Maps of Surrey lay open in the morning room. Several guests had come to discuss roads and drainage. Others had come because Arthur Wycliffe had taken an interest in Francis Davenport. Flora stood near the long window with 2 young women from neighboring estates. My cousin has always loved stones, she said as Francis approached. As a child, she filled drawers with them. Now she has discovered that chalk may be made romantic if one discusses it before a duke. One of the women hid a smile behind her teacup. Francis felt the familiar pressure to pretend she had not heard. She was tired of granting comfort to people who offered none. Chalk is not romantic, she said. It is merely dangerous when men remove too much of it from beneath occupied ground. Flora's smile sharpened. There, you see? Even a county visit becomes a lecture. Then perhaps the county should stop providing the subject. Or perhaps you enjoy being the only woman who believes she understands it. I would be delighted to be one of many, but not quite so noticed. Arthur entered at the last words. He had not heard the beginning. His glance moved from Flora's satisfied expression to Francis's still one. Miss Davenport's difficulty, he said, is not that she wishes to be the only informed woman in Surrey. It is that Surrey appears determined to make the competition undemanding. Laughter moved through the room. Flora flushed. The 2 young women looked down at their cups. Arthur offered Francis a slight bow, as though he had restored justice with a single polished sentence. Francis saw the kindness in his intention. She also saw every face turn toward her with renewed amusement. For one instant, she was no longer a witness to unsafe ground. She was the clever woman a duke had chosen to defend. Your Grace, the Dowager Duchess called from the map table, and the company shifted. Francis waited until the others had moved away before speaking. That was very skillful. Arthur glanced at her. You do not sound grateful. Flora stopped. That was the purpose. She stopped because the room laughed at her. I confess I have sometimes found that effective. Wit may stop cruelty for a moment. Francis kept her voice low. It can also make the truth look like entertainment. The ease left his expression. You think I made you part of the joke. I think you made the room enjoy the correction more than understand it. Arthur looked toward the guests now bending over the road maps. I have spent years using humor to control a room before it can judge me. Does it work? Usually. Then you may not always notice what else it controls. He was silent long enough that Francis wondered whether she had gone too far. Then he said, "I understood the warning in your voice. I am less certain I have learned from it yet." It was not a charming answer. That made it the better one. Before Francis could reply, the estate steward entered and crossed directly to Arthur. His face was grave. "Your Grace, Mr. Vicary has called the Greycross men together. He's asking them to sign a statement that Miss Davenport entered the adit and pulled the wedge free." Arthur's jaw tightened. "Have any signed?" "Two. One refused." "Who?" The steward hesitated. Francis remembered her promise to Mrs. Hales. Arthur saw the change in her face and did not repeat the question. "Do not name him here," he said. "Find out whether he wants protection before you offer it." The steward bowed. The following morning, a folded tenancy notice was pushed beneath the door of Mrs. Hales's cottage. Her husband had 7 days to leave. By Saturday evening, the county had decided that Frances Davenport was either brave, foolish, or in love with a duke. Few people seemed willing to consider that she might simply have been right. Kestrel Court's natural history gathering had been arranged weeks before the fissure opened at Greycross, but the quarry dispute changed the meaning of every display. Fossils that would once have inspired polite curiosity now seemed to accuse the land itself. Maps of Surrey covered the long tables. Chalk specimens lay beneath glass domes. Near the windows, a painted cross-section of the downs showed white strata descending beneath green fields in clean, obedient lines. Francis knew the earth was rarely so obliging. She arrived with Mrs. Vale shortly after 7. Her elderly cousin wore black silk, carried a plain ivory fan, and regarded the crowded gallery with the calm indifference of a woman who had survived marriage, widowhood, and 3 decades of county dinners. Francis's left heel had healed enough that she walked without a limp. The shallow cut in her palm had closed. She wore serviceable evening shoes and a grey-blue gown that belonged entirely to her, though the bodice had been altered twice. Her ruined pair remained sealed in Mr. Bell's locked evidence cupboard. The wedge and fossil-bearing chalk sample remained there as well. Nothing connected to the inquiry had been returned, misplaced, or privately handled. That certainty steadied her more than elegance could have done. Arthur stood near the central display. Speaking with a magistrate and 2 landowners, he saw Francis before the footman finished announcing her. The warmth in his expression was restrained, but unmistakable. Lady Judith saw it too. She stood beside Flora beneath a portrait of the late Duke, her posture composed and her eyes cold. Arthur crossed the room when propriety allowed. "Mrs. Vale," he said, bowing, "you have rescued my gathering from too much expertise." Mrs. Vale looked at the crowded tables. "No gathering has ever suffered from too much expertise, Your Grace, only from too many people pretending to possess it." Arthur laughed. "I begin to see why Miss Davenport chose your house. She chose it because I charge fairly and ask fewer questions, a rare combination." He turned to Francis. "Your hand, healed, and your heel, nearly forgotten. That is not the same as healed. It is enough for one evening." His eyes dropped briefly to her shoes, then returned to her face. He did not ask whether they were new. He did not mention the pair she had hidden. "Mr. Bell has sent word," he said. "The seals remain intact. He will bring none of the evidence tonight." Francis approved. "This is a social gathering, not an inquiry. Some of my guests appear confused on that point. Most people prefer evidence when it can be served beside wine." Arthur's mouth curved. "You make it difficult for me to behave solemnly." "I have not asked you to be solemn, only accurate. Accuracy will do." The exchange ended when the Dowager Duchess approached to receive Mrs. Vale. Frances moved with them toward the gallery. She could feel eyes following her. Some held sympathy. Others held curiosity. More than one guest glanced toward Arthur as though his attention had transformed Frances into a new county fashion. She told herself that notice was not the same as value. She had spent too many years invisible to mistake sudden visibility for safety. Near the fossil display, Flora spoke loudly enough to be heard by a circle of young ladies. "My cousin has become quite celebrated for hearing the earth move." One woman smiled uncertainly. "It sounds very dramatic." "Frances has always preferred uncommon subjects," Flora continued. "When we were girls, she filled drawers with stones. Now half the county must discuss chalk because she has found a more distinguished audience." Frances stopped beside a tray of ammonites. "The county is discussing Greycross because men worked beneath unsafe supports." Flora's smile did not falter. "And yet you are the person everyone remembers. That is not my fault. No, it is His Grace's." A silence opened around them. Arthur had approached from behind the group. Frances knew from his expression that he had heard only the last exchange. He glanced at Flora, then at the women watching with poorly concealed interest. "Miss Davenport's difficulty," he said lightly, "is not that she seeks distinction. It is that Surrey has made ordinary sense appear remarkably rare." Laughter spread through the gallery. Flora's face colored. One of the young ladies lowered her eyes. Arthur's remark was elegant, swift, and devastating. It protected Frances exactly as his wit always did. The room enjoyed him for it. Then every gaze turned toward her, amused by the clever woman who had inspired the Duke's clever defense. Arthur did not see the danger at once. He offered Frances his hand and led her toward the central display, where a county map had been placed beneath a broad lamp. Guests gathered around. "Before we begin," he said, "there is one service that ought to be acknowledged." Miss Davenport rang the Greycross warning bell when others had not yet understood the danger. Several families cleared the lower road because she acted. His tone was sincere. Then instinct softened it. "I confess that most women who arrive late to my dinner have less useful reasons." The room warmed with laughter. Frances heard affection in it. She also heard the quarry vanish beneath the pleasing image of a disordered woman arriving late to charm a duke. Arthur continued, praising her presence of mind, yet the guests smiled at Frances rather than looking toward the Greycross section of the map. She thanked him because courtesy required it. She did not thank the room. Later, when the company divided between the gallery and music room, Arthur found her near a display of chalk shells. The Dowager Duchess and Mrs. Vale remained within sight, speaking beside the doorway. "You have been avoiding me," he said. "I have been observing the exhibits. With unusual determination, they do not expect answers from me." His expression changed. "I thought I had honored you. You did." "But," Frances looked at the fossil before her, "the room heard that I rang the bell. Then they heard that I arrived late to your dinner, and they laughed. At my remark, not at you. That distinction is clearer to the man who made it." Arthur went still. She continued, before courage failed. "Your praise was generous. Your humor made it pleasant. Yet by the time you finished, the guests were discussing me as an amusing woman you admire. They were not thinking about families beneath unsafe ground. I meant to disarm hostility. You did, and that was wrong. Not entirely." Frances turned to face him. "But being admired is not the same as being heard accurately." The words struck more deeply than anger would have done. Arthur looked across the gallery, where Lady Judith was recounting something to a magistrate's wife. "You warned me about this." "Yes, and I believed I understood." Understanding a flaw and abandoning it are different things. He accepted that without defense. "Do you regret ringing the bell?" "No, even now. I regret that truth so often needs permission from people who did not hear the earth move." A servant crossed the gallery carrying a tray. Frances stepped back to allow him room and found a raised strip of flooring behind her heel. Arthur opened his hand. He did not grasp her. "May I?" She placed her fingers in his. The step required only an instant, but neither released the other when she reached level ground. His hand remained warm and steady around hers, not possessive, not urgent. The gallery seemed to recede. "You should not need my permission to be believed," he said quietly. "No. Yet my name has already changed how the county listens. It has, and that may be as dangerous as silence." Frances looked at him. "It depends upon whether you repeat my words or replace them." His thumb shifted once against her glove, a small movement that felt more intimate than any compliment he had offered. Voices approached from the music room. Frances released him first. Arthur let her go at once. The estate steward appeared at the gallery entrance before either could speak again. He crossed directly to Arthur, his face grave. "Your Grace, the retired Greycross foreman has not come." Frances turned. The man had sent word 2 days earlier through a quarry widow. He had agreed to speak privately at Kestrel Court during the gathering, when his presence among tradesmen and collectors would attract little notice. "Was his message confirmed?" Arthur asked. "Yes, Your Grace. I sent a groom to his cottage this afternoon." The place was empty. His sister says he left before dawn with one bag and would not say where he was going. "Was he forced?" She saw no one with him. Flora had drifted close enough to hear. "How unfortunate," she said. A witness who disappears before repeating Frances's story. Frances felt the accusation spread before anyone answered. Lady Judith approached, composed and faintly triumphant. "This cannot continue through private hints and missing men," she said. "The county deserves clarity." Arthur's jaw tightened. "The county deserves facts. Then let us examine them publicly." Lady Judith looked toward Frances. "Mr. Vickery has arranged a supper at the Guildford Assembly Rooms on Tuesday. Magistrates, lease trustees, and interested landowners will attend." Her gaze sharpened. "Mr. Bell may bring the sealed evidence." Arthur did not accept on Frances's behalf. He looked at her. Frances understood the trap. She also understood that refusal would be shaped into fear before the carriage reached Mrs. Vale's house. "I will attend," she said. Flora smiled. Lady Judith inclined her head. Outside the gallery windows, Greycross Down lay dark beneath the evening sky. Somewhere beyond it, a frightened foreman had vanished from his cottage. In Mr. Bell's locked cupboard, France's torn shoes waited to be brought before the county. By Tuesday evening, the Guildford Assembly Rooms had acquired the solemnity of a court without any of its safeguards. Carriages lined the street beneath a grey sky. Landowners, lease trustees, magistrates, quarry contractors, and their wives filled the long supper room, where candles burned above polished tables, and every conversation seemed to pause when Frances entered. She came with the Dowager Duchess and Mrs. Vale. Her heel had healed. Her palm no longer required a bandage, yet she felt more exposed than she had on the night the ground first shifted, because danger in the earth obeyed no social appetite. This danger did. Arthur stood near the magistrate's table in evening dress, his expression controlled. He did not cross the room to meet her. Francis understood why. Any show of intimacy would feed the story Lady Judith meant to tell. Still, when his eyes found hers, the steadiness there gave her one moment of quiet before Cyril Vickery called the gathering to order. He spoke with the measured courtesy of a man who wished accusation to resemble duty. "No one here disputes that Miss Davenport rang the Greycross bell," he began. "The question is whether she responded to danger or created the appearance of it." A murmur passed through the room. Mr. Bell, the county surveyor, sat beside a locked case. Before opening it, he displayed the unbroken wax seals and compared them with the custody record signed on the 16th of May. 2 magistrates confirmed the marks. Francis watched as he removed the first parcel, then the second. Her black evening shoes appeared beneath the candlelight exactly as she remembered them. The left sole remained split. Chalk lay in the stitching. Red paint crossed the worn leather. The blue silk repair showed inside the lining. Nothing had been cleaned, improved, or altered. The wedge followed. Its crushed end and flaking paint drew several guests closer. Mr. Bell placed both objects on a white cloth, then stepped back. Cyril turned toward Francis. These shoes carried red paint from the same kind found upon the wedge. "Is that correct?" "The paint appears similar," Francis said. "Mr. Bell has not yet established that it came from the same mixture. You do not deny that you possessed the wedge." "I found it beside the fissure and placed it in my reticule. After entering the restricted working, I did not enter the adit." Cyril lifted the wedge. Mr. Bell immediately said, "Do not remove it from the cloth." Cyril set it down with an apologetic inclination of his head. "Of course, we must all respect procedure, yet procedure cannot answer the simplest question. How did an object said to have come from within a support opening reach Miss Davenport's hand unless she went farther than she admits?" Francis kept her breathing even. "It was expelled during the fracture. I recovered it from the chalk beside the road." "That is your account." "Yes, unsupported by any witness. Mrs. Hales saw me cross the road. She did not see where the wedge first landed." Lady Judith sat in the front row beside Flora, dressed in mourning lavender that made her appear dignified rather than embattled. Frances has always possessed a vivid certainty about what she believes she has observed, she said. Her father encouraged it. Arthur's gaze hardened, but he remained silent. Cyril called the next witness. Mr. Hales entered through the side door with his cap in both hands. Francis felt the room tilt. He looked older than he had beside the quarry cottagers, though only 2 weeks had passed. His eyes found hers and dropped at once. "Were you working near the lower road on the 15th of May?" Cyril asked. "Yes, sir." "Did you see Miss Davenport?" "I saw her near the old opening." Francis did not move. "How near?" "Near enough to touch the supports." A whisper travelled through the audience. Mrs. Hales had said her husband spoke of night blasting. She had also said their cottage depended upon his employment. Francis saw the folded tenancy notice as clearly as if it lay on the table. Cyril continued. "Did you see her holding the wedge?" "Yes, sir." "Before or after the bell?" Mr. Hales swallowed. "Before." The lie arrived quietly. That made it crueler. Francis could have challenged him. She could have spoken of the notice beneath his door and the child who woke when carts passed. Instead, she asked, "Mr. Hales, were you above the road or below it when you saw me?" His fingers tightened around the cap. "Below." "Then the chalk bank stood between you and the support opening." Cyril interrupted. "This is not a survey lesson." "No," Francis said. "It is a question of sight." One magistrate leaned forward. "Answer her." Mr. Hales stared at the floor. I saw movement near the opening. Did you see my hand touch a support? Silence. Cyril stepped in. The witness has already answered. He answered a different question, Francis said. Lady Judith rose with graceful reluctance. Must we humiliate a working man because Francis dislikes his memory? Flora added. He has no reason to lie. Francis has every reason to make the event appear heroic. She looked toward Arthur. It has certainly brought her distinction. Several faces turned to the Duke. Flora's voice softened with practiced sorrow. His Grace praised her before half the county. He made her courage the entertainment of his own gathering. Is it unreasonable to ask whether she discovered how rewarding alarm could be? Arthur stood. Anger had stripped the ease from his face. Francis knew, before he spoke, that he meant to defend her. She also knew he had not yet learned how dangerous his defense could become. Miss Davenport has more dignified ways to catch a duke, he said, though I confess Surrey has offered her remarkably poor competition. Laughter broke across the room. It struck Flora first. Her face flushed. Lady Judith sat rigid with outrage. For one bright instant, the cruelty reversed. Then Francis saw the magistrate's wife smile at her. A landowner whispered behind his hand. The room was no longer considering a fissure, false timber, or threatened cottages. It was considering whether Francis wished to catch Arthur Wycliffe. Arthur continued, more gravely now, whatever motive you choose to invent, the Greycross workings remain closed by my order until an independent examination is complete. The laughter faded, but the frame remained. Francis had become a romantic curiosity inside her own warning. She rose. Mr. Bell, please reseal the shoes and wedge. Cyril turned. We have not concluded. You have concluded enough for one evening. Leaving may be interpreted as fear. Francis looked at him. Then you will interpret it as you please, Mr. Bell wrapped the shoes first. Francis watched the paper close over the red paint, the split sole, and the blue stitching. He tied the parcel, applied fresh wax, and recorded the renewed seals before witnesses. The wedge was treated the same way. Both returned to his locked case. Only then did Francis face Arthur. He had left the magistrate's table and stood near the aisle, one hand open at his side. Francis, he said quietly. She did not take the offered hand. You protected me from one insult by making me the center of another. Pain crossed his face. That was not my intention. I know. Her voice remained low. That does not change what the room heard. The Dowager Duchess came to her side without ceremony. Mrs. Vale followed. Arthur escorted them only as far as the entrance, and made no attempt to stop Francis when she entered the carriage. By morning, the local paper called the Greycross dispute, an eccentric contest between a geological lady and the Duke who champions her. There was no mention of Mr. Hale's tenancy notice. There was no mention of the families below the road. Before dawn, while the county laughed over romance, old support timbers were dragged from Greycross and burned in a lime pit. Smoke from the lime pit reached Mrs. Vale's house before the official notice did. By 8 o'clock the morning after the assembly room's supper, a grey stain lay over Greycross Down, carrying the bitter smell of scorched paint and damp timber across the fields. Francis stood at the parlour window while Mrs. Vale read the local paper aloud in a voice sharpened by disapproval. The article called the dispute a romantic controversy involving an imaginative lady, a cautious duke, and a quarry perhaps more dangerous in reputation than in fact. It mentioned neither the false testimony nor the tenancy notice beneath Mr. Hales's door. It did not mention the wood charged as oak and delivered as beech. Francis listened until Mrs. Vale folded the paper with such precision that the crease split the Duke's printed name. "Someone should teach editors the difference between wit and evidence," the widow said. A carriage stopped outside before Francis could answer. Mr. Bell entered minutes later with chalk dust on his boots and anger held beneath professional restraint. The sealed shoes and wedge remained locked in his evidence cupboard. He said so before Francis asked. "The seals are untouched," he told her. What burned was secondary material removed from the working after the county closure. By whose order? Mr. Vickery claims it was necessary to make the lower section safe. "Safe from inspection," Mrs. Vale said. Mr. Bell did not contradict her. He explained that several old support timbers had been dragged from the adit before dawn and thrown into the lime pit. By the time he arrived with the magistrate's clerk, the paint had blistered away, and most of the wood had collapsed into charred fragments. A smaller crew had then triggered a controlled fall at the easiest entrance to the disputed section. Loose chalk and spoil now blocked the approach. No worker had been injured. No cottage had been struck. Yet the physical arrangement Francis had warned about could no longer be examined in place. "Can the entrance be reopened?" she asked. "Not safely without a proper crew, new supports, and more expense than the lease trustees will authorize during a dispute. Then Cyril has destroyed one question and replaced it with another." "Which question?" "Not whether the supports were wrong, but whether we can prove where they stood." Mr. Bell nodded. "The sealed wedge remains useful. The fossil sample remains useful. The official plan and the timber accounts remain useful. But the case can no longer depend upon walking into that adit and finding intact beech supports where the plan says there should be none." Francis looked toward the downs beyond the window. The smoke thinned as the wind shifted. "Then it will not." Mr. Bell's expression sharpened. "You have another method in mind?" "Not yet. Only a boundary. We must stop asking the hill to preserve what men have chosen to destroy." A second message arrived before noon. 2 Greycross workers had been dismissed. 3 families had been warned that their cottages belonged to the lease and could be reclaimed if they repeated allegations against the quarry office. Mr. Hales's 7-day notice remained in force. The retired foreman was still missing from his cottage. Francis felt the weight of each name she did not know, and each fear she had promised not to expose without consent. She could not protect the workers by turning them into symbols. She could not prove the danger by demanding they risk their children's homes. By afternoon, Lady Judith's response had reached the county in the form of handwritten notes copied by her servants and delivered to several influential houses. The old timbers, she declared, had been removed as part of ordinary remedial work. The controlled fall proved that nothing improper remained accessible. Any further alarm came from those who preferred scandal to practical management. Arthur did not endorse the statement. That was the first good thing Francis heard that day. The second came from the Dowager Duchess, who sent word asking Francis to visit Kestrel Court under Mrs. Vale's chaperonage. Arthur wished to show her a proposed public statement before it was released. Francis almost refused. Then she remembered his face at the assembly rooms when she declined his hand. He had understood that he had harmed her. Understanding did not guarantee correction, but it deserved an answer. The morning room at Kestrel Court was quiet when she arrived. Mrs. Vale joined the Dowager Duchess near the far window, close enough to satisfy propriety and distant enough to allow plain speech. Arthur stood beside a writing table, 3 pages lay before him in the precise hand of his estate solicitor. He looked tired rather than charming. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said I would see the statement before anyone else." "Yes," he offered the pages. Frances read them standing. The first paragraph praised her concern. The second acknowledged the warning bell. The third stated that, while Miss Davenport might have misunderstood certain surface signs, the Duke of Norchester believed her intentions sincere, and would maintain the quarry closure as a precaution. The last paragraph asked the county to set aside unkind speculation and treat her with the respect due a well-meaning gentlewoman. Frances read it twice. Each sentence was courteous. Together, they erased her. "You believe this will help me," she said. Arthur did not pretend otherwise. "It preserves the closure. It rebukes the gossip without inviting a prolonged public quarrel. It also prevents Lady Judith from arguing that I have accepted every allegation before the survey is complete. And it says I may have misunderstood. That is not an accusation. No, it is an arrangement." He went still. Frances placed the statement on the table. "You would leave the quarry closed, preserve my reputation, and allow the county to decide that I was wrong in an honourable way. I would give us time. At whose expense? No one is working beneath the hill. Workers are losing cottages above it." Arthur's jaw tightened. "I am preparing relief through the estate, without asking whether they wish to become your dependents. Would you rather I leave them exposed? I would rather you stop deciding that every choice lies between your protection and another person's ruin." The words landed harder than she intended. Arthur drew breath, but did not answer at once. Frances looked again at the statement. "This makes me harmless. It makes you difficult to attack. Because it makes me mistaken and grateful. That is not what I intended. You did not intend the laughter at the assembly rooms either." Pain moved across his face. She continued, quieter now. "You see danger and move quickly. That saved lives when you stopped the blasting. It becomes something else when you decide what truth I may safely keep." Arthur looked toward the pages. "The physical evidence has been damaged. The entrance is blocked. Bell cannot inspect the old supports. If I accuse Lady Judith and Vickery now, they will say I am using rank to settle a personal quarrel. Then do not accuse them without proof. That is what this statement avoids. It avoids more than accusation. It avoids the possibility that I am right." He turned away for a moment, one hand braced against the table. The ease that had once made every room bend around him was gone. Frances saw the temptation before him. He could make one gracious declaration: calm the county, protect the workers through private funds, and spare himself the humiliation of reopening the endorsement he had signed. Everything would look merciful. Nothing would be honest. "What would you have me say?" he asked. "Nothing yet. Silence will be interpreted. So will speech. The paper has already made you a spectacle. Then do not rescue me by writing a prettier version of it." He faced her again. "You think this is another joke? No, it is more dangerous because it is serious." Frances touched the first page with 2 fingers. "This tells everyone that I deserve kindness, even if my judgment cannot be trusted. That is not justice. It is a graceful ending, written before the truth has had its chance." Arthur's eyes lowered to the statement. "And if the truth cannot be recovered, then we say what can be proved and admit what cannot. Even if that leaves your name uncertain?" "My name is already uncertain." She held his gaze. "The workers' safety is not." For a long moment, neither spoke. Near the window, the Dowager Duchess had stopped pretending to examine Mrs. Vale's embroidery. Arthur gathered the 3 pages, but he did not tear them. Not yet. Bell says the case must shift to geometry, geology, records, and living witnesses, he said. Then let it. The foreman is missing. Missing is not dead. The workers are afraid. Fear is not silence forever. Arthur looked at her as if every answer removed another shield he had intended to place between her and the world. And what do you require of me now? Francis placed the draft between them. Decide whether you want the truth or a graceful ending. Arthur looked at the 3 pages as though they had become evidence against him. The morning room remained quiet. Beyond the windows, the lawns of Kestrel Court lay bright beneath a thin June sun. But the light did nothing to soften the words between them. Francis stood opposite him, with one hand resting near the rejected statement. Mrs. Vale and the Dowager Duchess remained by the far window, close enough to preserve propriety and wise enough not to interrupt. You asked what I require, Francis said. I require more than silence. Arthur lifted his eyes. Name it. Your original endorsement of Cyril Vickery's repair report. His expression changed by a degree. The original, not a copy prepared after the dispute. The letter carrying your signature. It is in the Kestrel estate correspondence. Then it can be produced. It can. I also want the correspondence showing that you relied upon summaries prepared by your office. Arthur's jaw tightened. Francis continued before he could turn the request into negotiation. And I want the county to know that you praised repairs you had never inspected. The Dowager Duchess's embroidery ceased moving. Arthur did not look toward his mother. That would weaken confidence in my estate management. Yes, it may weaken my standing as a magistrate. Yes, Vickery will use it to say the entire inquiry is driven by my embarrassment. Then let him. Francis kept her voice steady. The workers are being asked to risk employment, cottages, and pensions. Mr. Hales has already lied beneath that pressure. You cannot ask them to endanger everything while you protect the appearance that your signature was always wisely given. Arthur turned away from the table. He walked 2 measured steps toward the fireplace, then stopped. The movement was controlled, but Francis saw the struggle in it. He had surrendered charm. He had not yet surrendered consequence. I did not order the false supports, he said. No. I did not know the heading crossed the lease boundary. No. I did not threaten a tenant. No. He looked back at her. Yet you believe my endorsement belongs beside those acts. I believe it helped them remain unquestioned. The truth settled without cruelty, because cruelty was unnecessary. Arthur lowered his gaze to the statement. My father used to say that rank existed to prevent lesser men from delaying important decisions. He made certainty sound like duty, and doubt like weakness, like disobedience. Arthur placed both hands on the writing table. I learned to decide quickly, speak lightly, and leave no room for anyone to see the hesitation underneath. That may command a room. It has. It cannot command truth. He nodded once. Then he gathered the pages of the protective statement, held them together, and tore them from top to bottom. The sound was small. Francis felt it more deeply than the laughter at the assembly rooms. Arthur tore the halves again and placed them in the empty grate. There will be no statement saying you misunderstood, he said. There will be no appeal for kindness in place of proof. He faced her fully. I made your warning a joke at the natural history gathering. I treated my public affection as though it were accurate credit. At the assembly rooms, I answered an insult by making your relation to me the center of the room. Yesterday I tried to make you acceptable by softening your evidence. Each admission came without ornament. I am sorry, Francis, not because my intention was good. Intention does not restore what I took from your words. She had imagined an apology from him during the sleepless hours at Mrs. Vale's house. In those imaginings, he had always been eloquent. The real apology was harder to resist because it was plain. Francis did not forgive him. Not yet, but she believed he understood the charge. The endorsement letter, she said. You shall have it. Arthur rang for the estate clerk. When the man arrived, Arthur requested the winter correspondence concerning Greycross repairs. The clerk returned with a locked dispatch box and opened it on the writing table before witnesses. Arthur identified the original letter at once. His signature stood beneath a paragraph approving the reported closure of the lower adit and the replacement of unsound timber. He had praised the efficiency of the work. He had not written that he inspected it. The distinction protected him from one accusation and exposed him to another. Make an inventory entry, Arthur told the clerk, then send for the county clerk. The original is to pass into county custody under receipt. The estate clerk hesitated. The original, Your Grace. The original. By late afternoon, the county clerk arrived with a leather portfolio. He examined the letter, recorded its date and condition, and prepared 2 receipts. Arthur signed the transfer. The clerk signed acceptance. 1 receipt remained in the Kestrel correspondence file. The other passed to Arthur. He offered it to Francis. She shook her head. The letter is not mine. No, but the order of proof may be. What do you mean? I have spent too long deciding how others should tell the truth. He set the receipt beside the dispatch box. You know which evidence must come first. You know which witnesses have paid the greatest price. Determine the sequence. I will not place my admission where it makes me appear noble. Put it where it is accurate. Francis studied him. The shoes and wedge first, because they establish where the accusation began. Mr. Bell's measurements after that, if we obtain them. Workers should speak before financial records. Their danger is not merely a matter of money. Your endorsement should come after Cyril's certificate. So the county sees how his authority borrowed mine. Yes, and Lady Judith, after the timber and lease accounts. Motive must not be mistaken for proof. Arthur's expression held no smile, but something warmer than approval moved through it. I will follow that order. There is not yet an inquiry to follow. Then we shall earn one. A knock interrupted them. Arthur's steward entered, carrying a folded note addressed to Francis. This came through the quarry widow, miss, she said. It concerns the retired foreman. Francis opened it. The message was brief and unsigned. The foreman had not fled the county. Cyril had threatened to end his pension if he spoke. He had gone to his widowed sister's cottage 6 miles beyond Greycross, and would receive Francis if she came without anyone bearing the Duke's authority. Arthur read nothing over her shoulder. Is he safe? He asked. For now. She folded the note. He will speak, but not to a ducal party. What do you need, Mr. Bell? A magistrate's clerk if the foreman agrees to a formal statement. The Dowager Duchess's companion. An unmarked, hired carriage. Not mine, not yours. Arthur accepted the boundary before she finished explaining it. Do you want me there? Francis looked at him. She saw the effort it cost him to ask, rather than act. Not for the first conversation. His answer came without hesitation. Then I will not go. The next morning, Francis travelled with Mr. Bell and the Dowager Duchess's companion in a plain hired carriage. No Wycliffe crest marked the door. The foreman's sister received them in a narrow cottage smelling of tea, beeswax, and damp wool. Her brother sat beside the hearth with a rolled quarry plan across his knees. He looked tired, but not broken. Mr. Bell placed the certified copy of the official plan on the table. "We will record nothing without your consent," Francis said, "and no one from House Wycliffe is present." The foreman studied her for a long moment. Then he unrolled the map, took up a blunt pencil, and drew a line beyond the neat black ending of the edit. The line crossed the marked lease stone and turned north. "They did not stop there," he said. "They turned beneath His Grace's hill." The retired foreman kept his pencil on the line he had drawn across the certified quarry plan. "They turned north after the lease stone," he said. "Not far at first." Then Mr. Vickery ordered the heading driven toward the upper chalk beneath Kestrel land. Mr. Bell leaned closer without touching the page. The Dowager Duchess's companion sat near the cottage window, while the magistrate's clerk, summoned only after the foreman agreed to make a formal statement, waited with paper and ink. Francis remained opposite the hearth. She did not ask the old man to speak faster. Fear had already hurried him out of his home once. "Why was the extension left from the official plan?" she asked. "Because it was never meant to be measured." The foreman's voice had roughened with age and shame. The new heading brought better chalk. "Cleaner, worth more." Mr. Vickery said the lease stones above ground did not matter if no one could prove where we were below. "And the supports?" Mr. Bell asked. "Beech. Green when it came. They painted the cut ends red and told the men to call it oak if anyone asked." "Who gave that order?" "Mr. Vickery. Lady Judith knew the oak had not been bought. I heard them quarrel over the invoices." The clerk's pen moved steadily. Francis watched the foreman's hands. They trembled only when he mentioned the workers. "There was an old ventilation shaft," he continued, "half covered with thorn beyond the north ridge. We used it after dark when the lower road was watched. The spoil came up there in baskets." "Is the shaft still open?" Francis asked. "It was when I left. Can the hidden heading be measured from it without entering the blocked adit, Mr.?" Bell looked at the plan, then at the line the foreman had drawn. "If the shaft can be located, and if we establish its depth and bearing, we may be able to trace the direction from the surface." Francis turned back to the foreman. "Would you show us?" He stared at the fire. "Mr. Vickery said my pension would end if I spoke." "It may." Francis did not offer a promise she could not keep. "His Grace may be able to help, but I will not make your livelihood depend upon his favor in exchange for testimony." The foreman looked up. Then, "What can you promise?" "That your words will be recorded as yours, that no one will turn them into a story you did not tell, and that you will not be asked to enter unsafe ground." For the first time, he looked directly at her. "I'll show you the shaft." The inspection took place the following morning under a washed blue sky. Francis travelled again in the plain hired carriage with the Dowager Duchess's companion. Mr. Bell rode with the magistrate's clerk and carried his survey case, the certified quarry plan, and the foreman's signed statement. The sealed shoes, red-painted wedge, and fossil-bearing chalk block remained secured under his custody. None was opened or transferred. The foreman met them beside a narrow lane beyond Greycross, where thorn and elder had grown thick over the northern slope. He led them along a sheep track until he stopped before a shallow depression hidden by bramble. Beneath the branches lay a circular stone rim, cracked but unmistakable. "The ventilation shaft," he said. Mr. Bell tested the ground before allowing anyone nearer. He lowered a weighted line into the opening and measured the depth. Then he set a compass bearing from the shaft toward the lease stone marked on the certified plan. Francis held the field book while the clerk recorded each figure. No one entered the shaft. No one approached the unstable lower adit. From the shaft, Mr. Bell laid out the survey chain across the grass, in measured lengths. The foreman corrected the direction once. "A little west," he said. The heading bent around a hard band before turning north. Mr. Bell adjusted the bearing. The line crossed the visible lease boundary and continued onto Kestrel land. Francis felt the meaning before anyone spoke it. The hidden excavation was no longer a suspicion carried in the memory of one frightened man. It had direction, distance, and a point upon the ground. "How far beneath the Duke's land?" the clerk asked. Mr. Bell checked the figures. "At least 32 yards beyond the lease line, perhaps more. We will state only what the measurement supports." Francis glanced at him. "A smaller truth." "Still true," he replied. Near the shaft lay a mound partly concealed by nettles. Fresh chalk showed beneath an older crust. Grey marl ran through several broken pieces, and small ammonite curls marked the surface. Mr. Bell crouched beside it. "This resembles the band from the Greycross spoil heap. The same one my father described beneath the upper Kestrel slope," Francis said. "We will not call it identical without formal comparison," he said. "But its presence here is consistent with the hidden heading reaching this seam." The clerk recorded the observation. The foreman pointed toward a rut leading away from the mound. Night carts used that track. A second witness waited at the edge of the field. The Davenport woodman had come voluntarily after learning the foreman had spoken. He confirmed that beech had been felled from Lady Judith's woods and delivered after dark to the quarry. "No oak went with it," he said. "The marked oaks are still standing." Mr. Bell then produced a certified extract sent that morning by the Guildford timber merchant. The original order book had not left the merchant's office. The extract showed no sale of seasoned oak to Greycross during the repair period. The clerk read the certification aloud and added it to the county file. By noon, Mr. Hales arrived with his wife. He removed his cap when he saw Francis. Shame bent his shoulders more than labor had. "I lied at the assembly rooms," he said. Mrs. Hales stood close beside him. "Mr. Vickery told me the cottage would go if I didn't say I saw you near the supports." "Did you see me remove the wedge?" Francis asked. "No." "Did you see me enter the adit?" "No." "What did you see?" "You crossed the road after the ground moved. You rang the bell. Later, I saw the wedge in your hand." The magistrate's clerk prepared a corrected statement. Mr. Hales read it slowly, moving his finger beneath each line, then signed. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. Francis looked toward Mrs. Hales, who had spent 2 weeks fearing the loss of her child's home. "Fear does not make the lie harmless," she replied. "But I know what was placed against you." He swallowed. "The notice still stands. It will be part of the inquiry." Francis did not promise more. She would not replace one powerful dependency with another. Only when the measurements, statements, and certified extract had been secured did Francis send a note to Kestrel Court. Arthur arrived on horseback less than an hour later, accompanied only by his steward. He dismounted at the edge of the field and stopped before approaching. "May I join you?" he asked. Francis nodded. Mr. Bell showed him the survey line, the shaft depth, and the point where the measured heading crossed beneath Kestrel land. Arthur listened without interruption. He read the foreman's statement and Mr. Hales's correction. He did not look toward Francis until every witness had finished. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "A petition for an open county inspection here," she said. "On the land itself. The magistrates must preside. Not House Wycliffe. Agreed. The workers must be able to speak without losing their cottages before judgment. I will ask for a temporary restraint through the magistrates, not offer private relief as payment for testimony. Francis heard the change in his answer, and your endorsement letter remains in county custody. It does. Mr. Bell closed his survey case. The clerk gathered the signed statements. The foreman walked back toward his sister's cottage with Mrs. Hales and her husband. Arthur remained beside Francis as the field emptied. You proved the direction without entering the hill, he said. Mr. Bell proved the measurement, at your insistence, at the foreman's direction. You refuse every crown offered to you, only the ones that belong to someone else. Arthur looked toward the marked line, crossing the grass. I once believed protection meant reaching the answer before anyone else could be harmed. And now I think it may mean waiting until the right person has finished speaking. Francis began walking toward the hired carriage. After several steps, she stopped and turned. Will you walk with me? He came to her side, but did not offer his arm or take her hand. Francis let the silence remain between them until they reached the roughest part of the path. Then she opened her gloved hand. Arthur looked down, understanding the choice she had given him. He placed his hand beneath hers, gently and without triumph. Together they crossed the uneven ground. By evening, the county inspection was fixed for Tuesday, the 12th of June. Arthur's original endorsement would be read before his tenants, his peers, and the workers whose danger his signature had helped conceal. On the evening before the county inspection, Kestrel Court seemed to be holding its breath. The house had quieted early, though servants still crossed the lower passages carrying folded cloths, sealed packets, and lists for the morning. Mr. Bell's cart would leave at sunrise with the torn shoes, the red-painted wedge, and the fossil-bearing chalk sample still under his custody. Arthur's original endorsement remained with the county clerk. Nothing required for the inquiry lay in private hands. Francis arrived with Mrs. Vale shortly after 8. The Dowager Duchess received them in the morning room, then moved into the adjoining chamber with Mrs. Vale, leaving the connecting door open. Their voices remained softly audible beyond it. Arthur stood near the long window with no papers before him and no smile prepared. Francis noticed that first. He had always used ease the way other men used armor. Tonight, he had come without either. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You asked to speak before tomorrow." "I did." He gestured toward a chair, then waited until she chose to sit. He remained standing for a moment before taking the place opposite her. Between them lay a low table, bearing only an unlit lamp and a small vase of white campion. Nothing official, nothing that might give him the advantage of business over feeling. "I have apologized for what I did," Arthur began, "but I do not think I have told you why I kept doing it." Francis folded her hands in her lap. "An explanation is not the same as an excuse." "I know." He looked toward the dark glass of the window. "My father believed uncertainty was a weakness best corrected in public. If a steward hesitated, he mocked him. If my mother questioned a decision, he made the room laugh before she finished speaking. He could turn another person's doubt into entertainment so quickly that no one remembered what had been asked. His voice remained controlled, but the effort showed in the stillness of his shoulders. I learned early that the safest place in a room was beside the laughter, never beneath it. Francis understood then why his wit could feel both generous and dangerous. It had once protected him from humiliation. He had carried it into adulthood until it became authority. "So you learned to speak first," she said, "and lightly. If I made a room comfortable, I could decide what it believed before anyone had time to decide what they believed about me. That worked at the natural history gathering. Yes, and at the assembly rooms. Yes," he did not look away. "I turned your warning into a story I could control. First, I made you charming. Then I made you defensible. After that, I tried to make you safely mistaken." The plainness of the words tightened something in her chest. "You thought you were protecting me. I was protecting the version of myself that knew what to do." Arthur leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees, his hands open. "I feared that if I admitted failure in public, everything attached to my name would weaken, the quarry closure. The workers' claims, your credibility, my own judgment. So I tried to build a cleaner account in which I remained useful and you remained unharmed. But unheard. Yes, the word carried no defense. I am ashamed that I understood your courage before I understood your authority over your own truth." Frances looked down at her hands. "I trusted you because you noticed my shoes and did not display them." Arthur's face tightened. "I remember. You saw what I wanted hidden, and you chose not to use it. That was the first kindness." She lifted her eyes. "I stopped trusting you when you displayed my courage as part of your charm." He accepted the wound in silence. Frances continued, because tomorrow would leave no room for anything unfinished. "At the assembly rooms, I knew you meant to defend me. That almost made it worse. I could not accuse you of indifference. I had to admit that affection can still silence a person when it speaks over them." Arthur's breath left him slowly. "I do not want my affection to become another force you must survive. Then it cannot demand gratitude when it is wrong. It will not. It cannot turn apology into pressure. It will not. And it cannot assume love grants, permission." For the first time, something unguarded moved across his face. "No," he said, "it cannot." The word love remained between them. Frances had not intended to speak it first, even indirectly. Yet once it was present, pretending otherwise would have been another graceful lie. Arthur rose, but he did not come closer. He stood beside the table, as though distance itself were a promise he meant to keep. "I love you, Frances." There was no wit in his voice, no careful phrasing designed for effect. "I love the woman who rang the bell, the woman who contradicted me, and the woman who may still decide that my love is not reason enough to remain." Frances felt the truth of it in the restraint, more than the declaration. He had not asked for forgiveness. He had not attached a proposal, a rescue, or a future she had not chosen. He had placed the feeling before her and left it there. "I love you too," she said. Arthur closed his eyes for one brief moment. When he opened them, she saw wonder, relief, and fear all undisguised. Frances went on, "But love must leave my voice intact, even when I am inconvenient, even when what I say exposes you. Especially then." His answer came without hesitation. He held out one hand, palm upward. "May I take your hand?" Frances rose. She placed one hand in his, then the other. His fingers closed gently around both, warm and steady. Neither of them spoke. The silence did not feel empty. It held every moment in which he had reached too quickly, and every moment in which she had expected to be overruled. He did not pull her toward him. He simply remained. Frances felt the last of her resistance change, not into surrender, but into choice. She stepped closer. Arthur's hands loosened at once, allowing her to move as she wished. Frances released him, only to place her arms around him. For one heartbeat, he remained still. Then he held her, carefully at first, then with a tenderness so complete that she felt the force of all he had refused to claim. Her cheek rested against his coat. Beneath it, his heart beat hard and uneven. "Frances," he whispered. She drew back enough to see him. His hands remained lightly at her waist, but only because she had placed herself there. "May I kiss you?" he asked. Yes, the answer belonged wholly to her. Arthur bent his head. The kiss was gentle, then deepened by one quiet degree when Frances lifted her face and met him without hesitation. There was no urgency in it, no attempt to consume the moment. It was the first thing between them that needed neither defense nor proof. When they parted, Arthur rested his forehead briefly against hers. "I will not ask you for more tonight," he said. "You do not need to promise restraint as though I fear you. No." A faint warmth touched his expression. "Then I will simply practice it." Frances almost smiled. That would be more useful. They returned to the chairs, though their hands remained joined across the small table. Together, they reviewed the evidence order one final time. Frances would begin with the shoes and the wedge. Mr. Bell would verify the seals and present the measurements. The retired foreman and Mr. Hales would speak before any financial account was opened. The timber merchant's certified extract would follow. Then the Davenport woodman's statement. Cyril's safety certificate would be read before Arthur's endorsement. So the county could see how false authority had borrowed rank. Only after the technical and human proof would Lady Judith's lease income and quarry accounts establish motive. Arthur would speak last. He would not correct Frances, summarize her, or turn confession into command. "And if they interrupt," he asked, "the magistrates must stop them, not me. Not unless the magistrates fail to preserve order." Agreed. From the adjoining room came the quiet closing of Mrs. Vale's fan. The hour had grown late. Arthur lifted Frances's hand and held it between both of his without kissing it, as though even tenderness should not become performance. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will stand where you place me." Frances looked at him across the dim room. "Stand where the truth places you." At sunrise, Mr. Bell's cart carried the sealed shoes toward Greycross Down. By 9 o'clock, Greycross Down had become a place where no one could pretend the hill was merely scenery. A long table stood on firm ground above the blocked lower working, covered with white cloth and guarded by the county clerk. Magistrates sat beneath a canvas awning, quarry trustees, neighboring landowners, tenants, workers, and their families gathered in a wide half-circle beyond the ropes. A reporter from the county paper kept his notebook open. Lady Judith stood beside Flora near the front, both dressed with severe propriety. Cyril Vickery occupied a place near the trustees. His face composed enough to suggest that facts were only another kind of argument. Arthur stood apart from the magistrates. He wore no ceremonial ease. He did not preside. Frances arrived with Mrs. Vale and the Dowager Duchess, then walked to the evidence table alone. Mr. Bell opened his locked case before the magistrates. He compared the wax seals with the custody record from the 16th of May, then invited 2 officials to verify that none had been disturbed. Only after they agreed did he cut the strings. The torn black evening shoes appeared first. The split left sole, the chalk in the stitchings, the red paint across the leather, and the blue silk repair inside the lining remained exactly as they had been when Frances surrendered them. The wedge followed, pale where its red paint had flaked, crushed at one end, dark with damp decay. Mr. Bell placed both upon the cloth and stepped back. Frances faced the people who had laughed at her, doubted her, defended her badly, and depended upon the ground beneath her warning. Her voice did not shake. I hid these beneath his Grace's table because I feared they made me ridiculous. They did not. They showed where I had stood when others preferred not to look. No one laughed now. She pointed first to the shoe. The paint marks the place where I trapped the wedge before lifting it from the chalk. It does not prove that I entered the adit. It proves only that the shoe and wedge came into contact near the fissure. Mr. Bell confirmed the limited conclusion. Then he examined the wood before the magistrates. This is beech, not seasoned oak. The crushed end shows pressure damage. The decay is consistent with damp exposure. The red paint conceals the grain but does not alter the species. Cyril rose, and yet Miss Davenport possessed it. That remains undisputed. So does the location where she says she found it, Mr. Bell replied. Her possession proves neither removal nor sabotage. Cyril turned toward the retired foreman. You cannot know when the wedge left the support. The old man stepped forward with his signed statement in the county file. I know how it was fitted, he said. The wedge had loosened weeks before. I reported movement twice. Mr. Vickery said we would replace it after the next load went through. Cyril's expression sharpened. You are protecting your pension. You threaten to end it. A murmur moved through the workers. The foreman continued. That wedge was under strain. When the chalk fractured, it would have been driven out. Miss Davenport did not pull it free. Mr. Hales came next. He removed his cap and faced the magistrates rather than Francis. I lied at the assembly rooms, he said. Mr. Vickery told me my cottage would be taken if I did not say I saw Miss Davenport near the supports. I saw her cross the road after the ground moved. I saw her ring the bell. I saw the wedge in her hand later. I did not see her enter the adit. One magistrate asked whether the tenancy notice remained in force. Mr. Hales produced it. The clerk took it under receipt. Cyril objected that one frightened labourer's correction could not establish the direction of an underground heading. Francis answered before Arthur could speak. No, that is why the measurement follows. Mr. Bell unrolled the official quarry plan beside the corrected boundary survey. He explained the certified plan's false ending, the ventilation shaft located beyond the north ridge, the measured depth, the compass bearing, and the survey chain laid from the shaft across the lease boundary. He kept the language plain. The hidden heading crossed the Greycross lease line and continued at least 32 yards beneath Kestrel land. We state no farther distance because the surface measurements do not support one. The county clerk marked the lease stone on both plans. The difference could be seen from several paces away. Cyril insisted that an old shaft might have served abandoned workings unrelated to the recent spoil. Mr. Bell opened the sealed chalk parcel. The grey marl band and curled ammonite fragments were shown beside a witnessed sample gathered near the ventilation shaft. The material is consistent with the same deeper seam, he said. This alone would not prove the tunnel. With the survey, the witness statement, and the fresh spoil, it supports the same conclusion. The Guildford timber merchant came forward next. His certified extract showed no sale of seasoned oak to Greycross during the repair period. The original Audiobook remained in his office. The Davenport woodman confirmed that beech had been felled from Lady Judith's property and delivered after dark. The marked oaks were never cut, he said. They are standing still. Cyril attempted to turn the distinction into local discretion. The quarry accounts ended that defence. The county clerk opened certified copies showing payment for seasoned oak, followed by unexplained differences between declared chalk output and lease income transferred through Lady Judith's accounts. The figures did not prove every hidden load. They proved that money had been charged for material never purchased, and that profit had gone unrecorded. Lady Judith's composure finally broke. The quarry supported households beyond my own. Adjustments were necessary. Francis looked at her. Necessary to whom? Cyril's safety certificate was read next. It declared the lower adit closed, the supports sound, and the roadside section secure. The retired foreman testified that Cyril had not inspected the concealed heading. Then the county clerk produced Arthur's original endorsement. The letter praised the repairs and accepted Cyril's summary without personal examination. Every face turned toward the Duke. Arthur stepped forward only after the magistrate called his name. He did not stand beside Francis. He stood where the evidence placed him. "That signature is mine," he said. "I relied upon a convenient report because my name made convenience appear trustworthy. I did not inspect the works. I allowed rank to substitute for examination." He faced the workers first. "You were endangered by a false certificate strengthened by my endorsement. I am sorry." Then he faced Francis. "Miss Davenport warned this county. I made her warning into entertainment and later tried to protect her by making her safely mistaken. I was wrong." Finally, he addressed the magistrates. "I submit the letter without condition and accept whatever correction my office requires." His admission altered the air more than any denial could have done. Cyril could no longer hide behind ducal approval when the Duke himself had surrendered it. Flora rose abruptly. "I knew nothing about unsafe timber." A housemaid from Lady Judith's residence stepped forward at the clerk's call. She had heard Cyril rehearse Mr. Hales's accusation in the morning room before the assembly room's supper. Flora had been present. Miss Flora asked whether saying Miss Davenport wanted His Grace would make the story more believable, the maid said. Flora's face drained of color. "I did not know anyone might be hurt." "You knew the accusation was coached," one magistrate said. Flora looked toward Arthur, then toward Francis. "I wanted her removed from his attention." The admission established motive, but Francis did not allow it to carry more weight than the evidence deserved. "Flora's jealousy did not move the hill," she said. "It only helped conceal why it had moved." Lady Judith turned upon her. "Everything I did was for this family." The quarry income had fallen. Flora's future depended upon maintaining our position. The Davenport name could not survive public disgrace. Francis met her gaze. A family name does not become honorable by placing its weight upon people forbidden to speak. The senior magistrate called for silence. The Greycross lease was suspended pending formal proceedings. Cyril was removed as quarry agent and ordered to answer charges concerning fraud, endangerment, and witness coercion. A neutral receiver would take control of the records and wages. No worker tenancy could be terminated while the inquiry remained open. Lady Judith lost operational control of the quarry and was asked to resign her county charitable positions. Flora signed an immediate retraction of the sabotage accusation before witnesses. The magistrates formally recorded Francis as the first person to report the structural warning and preserve the wedge. Only after the clerk noted the final evidentiary use did Mr. Bell return the torn shoes to her under written receipt. Francis held them against her gown. They were still damaged. They no longer diminished her. When the crowd began to disperse, Arthur remained where he was until Francis looked at him. He did not cross the space first. She extended her hand. He came to her then and took it without triumph, his fingers closing gently around hers before workers, landowners, and the county that had once laughed. Much later, when only the Dowager Duchess, Mrs. Vale, and a few officials remained upon the downs, Arthur asked, "May I court you?" Francis looked toward the measured line crossing the grass, the line that had existed before anyone powerful agreed to see it. "Yes," she said, "but never make a prettier story than the truth." In May of 1850, nearly a year after the county stood upon Greycross Down and listened to the hill give evidence, the first row of new quarry cottages was ready for its threshold stones. The morning was mild, with spring light resting across the surveyed ground, and white campion growing beyond the marked building line. Frances stood beside the foundation in strong brown walking shoes purchased from her own earnings. They were sensible, well-fitted, and already dusted at the toes. She wore no ceremonial jewels beyond her wedding ring. Rank had changed the way people announced her, but it had not changed the name written beneath her observations. The county records still read Frances Davenport, later Duchess of Norchester, as the first person to report the Greycross fracture and preserve the wedge. Arthur had insisted that the wording remain hers. He had also learned not to insist where choice belonged to her. Their courtship had lasted more than 6 months. It had been public, chaperoned, and patient. He visited Mrs. Vale's house when invited. Frances came to Kestrel Court when she chose. They walked the downs with the Dowager Duchess or Mrs. Vale nearby, argued over estate maps, and learned that tenderness did not require agreement. When Arthur proposed in November, he did so in the map room without witnesses, beyond an open door, and his mother in the adjoining chamber. He asked once. Frances answered only after reading every clause of the proposed marriage settlement. They married in January after banns had been properly called. The settlement preserved her annuity, her personal earnings, and her authority over the work she had begun. Arthur never described that work as a pastime. By spring, Frances held a paid appointment maintaining Kestrel Court's mineral, quarry, and land condition records. Her reports included workers' observations beside those of stewards and surveyors. No warning could be dismissed merely because it began in a cottage rather than an estate office. The final Greycross judgments had not arrived with the speed of gossip, but they had arrived. Cyril Vickery was barred from acting as an estate agent and remained liable under continuing financial proceedings. Restitution was ordered from the false timber charges and concealed quarry profits. Lady Judith retained only the dower income, lawfully hers, after the Greycross lease was removed. She held no authority over worker tenancies, quarry wages, or county charities. Flora lived with maternal relations. Her written retraction remained in the county file, and the season that had once seemed the center of her future had passed without the invitations she expected. Frances did not rejoice in their reduction. Justice did not require delight. It required that they could no longer place their comfort upon the silence of others. The unsafe workings had been permanently sealed under Mr. Bell's direction. The cottages now rising on stable ground were funded first through recovered quarry money and restored lease accounts. Arthur had offered to pay the whole cost from ducal funds. Frances had refused. Generosity must not hide responsibility, she had told him. Then recovered money first, he had said, and Kestrel funds only for what remains after the debt is named. It was the answer of a man who had learned that agreement could be more honorable than rescue. Workers and their families gathered near the first cottage. Mr. and Mrs. Hales stood with their daughter beside the doorway. The retired foreman attended with his sister. Leaning upon a stick, but refusing the chair placed for him. Mr. Bell held the building plan. The county clerk had brought the recorded statement that would remain with the threshold register. Mrs. Vale stood beside the Dowager Duchess, both dressed in sober spring colours and both pretending not to watch Arthur watch his wife. Francis carried a tinned iron box in both hands. Inside lay the original black evening shoes returned to her after their final evidentiary use. They had not been repaired. The left sole remained split. The right toe was scuffed. A faint trace of red paint still crossed the leather, and the blue silk repair remained visible inside the lining. Loose dust had been brushed away, but nothing had been altered to make the damage attractive. Beside them lay a brief statement in Frances's hand, dated and signed. It recorded where she had stood, why she had rung the bell, how the shoes had entered county custody, and why she had chosen their final resting place. Arthur came to her side, but did not touch the box. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Yes. You never have to make a symbol of what hurt you." "I know." Francis looked toward the threshold opening prepared beneath the first stone. "That is why this time it is mine to choose." She turned so those nearest could hear. "I hid them once because I believed they diminished me. I placed them here because the truth they carried helped make this ground safe." The county clerk read the dated statement aloud. Mr. Bell verified the shoes against the old custody description. Then Francis placed the statement inside the box and closed the lid. The clerk passed sealing wax to her. She pressed her own plain personal seal beside the county mark. Arthur's seal was not used. The box belonged to her history, not to House Wycliffe's ownership of it. When the mason indicated that the opening was ready, Francis knelt carefully at the threshold. Arthur moved as though to help, then stopped. "May I?" he asked. She looked up at him and smiled. "Yes, take the other side." Together they lowered the box beneath the stone. Arthur bore its weight only after she gave it to him. Francis guided its placement. The mason settled the threshold above it, while workers, tenants, and county witnesses watched. No applause followed. The sound of stone meeting mortar was enough. After the gathering, people crossed into the first cottage to inspect the broad window, sound roof timbers, and dry floor. Mrs. Hales's daughter ran one gloved finger along the new sill. The retired foreman stood in the doorway until his sister quietly took his arm. Francis remained outside with Arthur when the others moved toward the second foundation. The threshold lay between them and the open cottage beyond. Arthur held out his hand. He still did that now. He offered rather than assumed. Francis placed her hand in his. "I love you," he said. "Not only because you rang the bell. I love you because you required me to become a man who listens before he speaks. And because you never mistook my shame for your duty to comfort me." Francis's fingers tightened around his. "I love you because you learned that standing beside me is an action, not a phrase. I'm still learning. So am I." His expression warmed. "May I kiss you, Your Grace?" "You may, Your Grace." Francis rose onto her toes and kissed him first. The affection was quiet, familiar, and freely returned. When they drew apart, Arthur did not turn the moment into a jest for the people nearby. He only touched his forehead briefly to hers and smiled. Francis looked down at her strong new shoes, then toward the doorway. "Shall we?" Arthur offered his hand again. "You first." "Beside me," she corrected. Together they crossed the threshold. Beneath the stone, the blue-stitched shoes no longer lay hidden because Francis feared being seen. They rested beneath honest ground because she had chosen what their truth would support.